I now declare this 16th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in order. Colleagues, we're here to hold a public hearing on Chapter 9, Offshore Banking, Canada Revenue Agency, of the Fall 2013 report of the Auditor General of Canada. A couple of minor housekeeping matters before we begin. Welcome Mr. Chisu, who's here today and subbing in. Welcome, sir. Hope you enjoy your time with us. And also, colleagues, you'll recall just 2 days ago we had another public hearing, and at that time, because we had to move, we lost some time, and we agreed that we would try to hold that business meeting that was scheduled for then today. So there has been some consultation with caucus leadership, and it's my understanding that we are in agreement that whatever comes first, the full rotation of the speakers, or 5:15, I will end the public session and move us into a business session where we will then review scheduling going forward. So the other thing is that will complicate things, and I'll just say it so in case people see the commotion. The bells are going to ring at 5:15 too. That's why I needed agreement, unanimous agreement, for us to continue past, because members have the right to say, I want this over and I'm responding to the bell. But my understanding is we have agreement, and at 5:15 for no longer than 5:30, the actual end of the scheduled end of our meeting, we will conduct committee business. Do I have that correct? Have I got what we are? Is there anybody that wants the floor to argue differently? Seeing none, then I will declare that we have unanimity on our approach today. And with that, we will now commence the focus on Chapter 9. And so I will welcome Marion McMahon, the Assistant Auditor General. Welcome. You may introduce the your delegation. And then we'll be over to the Canada Revenue Agency, Mr. Montroy, to do the same thing. With that, Ms. McMahon, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our audit of the offshore banking. I am accompanied today by Heather Miller, the director who was responsible for this audit. For our chapter on offshore banking, we focused our activities on the Liechtenstein bank list. This list was received by the Canada Revenue Agency from an informant in 2007. The agency has since received other similar lists. Nous avons examiné si l'agence.
We looked at whether the agency had found a sound approach to deciding whom to audit on the Liechtenstein list. We also examined the agency's audit files on those taxpayers to see whether the agency had followed its standard procedures.
Nous avons.
In addition, we examined how the agency used the intelligence gained from this project to change how it finds Canadian taxpayers who may have unreported income in offshore accounts. We also looked at changes to procedures for auditing this type of taxpayer. The agency had not audited every taxpayer on the list. Nevertheless, we found the work it had conducted was sufficient, given that some named on the list were not Canadian residents, and some could not be identified. Without additional information, there was little more the agency could have done. The agency followed its standard procedures in most of the audits and conducted them without undue delay. We found, however, that standards had not been established for the time it should take to complete files. As a result, we could not conclude on whether any delays caused by the agency were excessive. Standards for completing files on time would allow staff to gauge when their work may be taking too long or when they may need to change priorities.
That the agency agreed to waive its ability to refer taxpayers for criminal investigation in some cases. It did so in exchange for information it may not otherwise have received. For example, by making these arrangements, the agency learned how the offshore accounts were set up. Agency management told us that these agreements were only being used for the Liechtenstein list and that they were not being offered to those on subsequent lists. We are concerned, however, because we found that agency staff continued to make such agreements with some taxpayers whose names appeared on a more recent list. We recommended that the agency analyze how it makes agreements with taxpayers it is auditing to ensure that these agreements reflect agency project and program objectives. Since receiving the Liechtenstein bank list, the agency has received additional lists and information about taxpayers who may be Canadian residents and who may have offshore accounts. As well, changes in legislation will give the agency access to information about international fund transfers of more than $10,000. The agency needs to formalize its approach to dealing with the increase in its workload resulting from these developments. We recommended that the Canada Revenue Agency ensure that its objectives and audit procedures for offshore accounts reflect lessons learned. They should be documented and understood by staff so that staff members are ready for the projected increase of work in this area. The agency agreed with our recommendations and made several commitments in its response. We received a copy of the action plan the agency submitted to the committee and found it consistent with our recommendations. Monsieur le Président, je te
Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer the committee's questions.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. Montroy, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here today with Ms. Gina Gelmeni, who's our Director of Offshore Compliance Division in our branch. So the CRA is pleased to have the opportunity to come before the committee today to speak about the Auditor General's report, Chapter 9, Offshore Banking, which dealt with the Liechtenstein list received by the CRA. We appreciate the opportunity to highlight the CRA's efforts in combating offshore tax non-compliance and to once again thank the Auditor General for his recommendations. International tax evasion and aggressive international tax avoidance using offshore accounts are worldwide concerns, and Canada is among the many countries taking action to fight this complex problem. In 2007, the CRA was provided with a list containing information on individuals identified as potentially having undeclared income in offshore accounts in Liechtenstein. This was the very first time that such a list had been received by the CRA. Through its management of the list, the CRA gained valuable intelligence about these types of offshore investment structures. This intelligence will assist the CRA in further detecting taxpayers who may have undeclared offshore income. The Auditor General's report stated, and I quote, "Overall, the agency managed the Liechtenstein list as intended with the information and tools that it had," unquote. The report listed 3 recommendations, all of which were accepted by the CRA. The agency is taking a number of steps to address the issues identified in the report, including establishing and communicating timelines to both staff and taxpayers involved in carrying out audits related to offshore accounts, analyzing its use of agreements with taxpayers under audit to ensure that their use reflects agency offshore project and program objectives, and ensuring that its objectives and audit procedures for offshore accounts reflect lessons learned, are documented, communicated, and understood by staff. De plus, de nouvelles mesures.
In addition, new measures announced in Economic Action Plan 2013 will provide the CRA with additional tools that will further build the CRA's capacity to combat international tax evasion and aggressive international tax avoidance. These new measures include a new offshore tax informant program, which was launched in January of this year. The OTIP will pay individuals with knowledge of major international tax non-compliance between 5 and 15% of the federal tax assessed and collected as a result of the information provided, requiring financial institutions and others to report information on international electronic fund transfers greater than $10,000 to the CRA, introducing enhanced reporting requirements for Canadian taxpayers with foreign income and/or properties, as well as extending the amount of time the CRA has to reassess those who have not properly reported this income. The Canadian government has also committed $30 million over 5 years in support of these new measures to increase compliance efforts.
These new measures, the CRA has established the Offshore Compliance Division, which is a dedicated team that will be comprised of 70 CRA employees with expertise in the fields of data analysis and auditing. This division will work with specialized teams whose focus will be on identifying individuals that engage in international noncompliance, developing and implementing effective strategies and program activities to counter offshore noncompliance, and increasing the CRA's overall ability to pursue cases of international tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. Information sharing and international cooperation is key. The CRA has significantly improved its ability to obtain tax information from other jurisdictions through revised tax treaties and tax information exchange agreements, otherwise known as TIAs, with non-treaty countries. Canada has one of the most extensive tax treaty networks in the world, with 92 tax treaties and 18 TIAs now in force. All 18 TIAs, is important to know, have entered into force since 2008, as did 4 new tax treaties and 8 updated tax treaties. Le 21 novembre 2013, le Canada a...
On November 21st, 2013, Canada ratified the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters. This convention is a multilateral instrument whose purpose is to improve international tax cooperation and exchange of information between taxation authorities in accordance with international standards, with a view to combating international tax avoidance and evasion.
Record in finding and resolving cases where individuals were participating in or promoting aggressive offshore tax compliance, and we are seeing results. Since 2006, the CRA has audited nearly 8,000 cases suspected of having an aggressive international tax component and has identified approximately $4.58 billion in additional federal taxes from these compliance activities. Through the CRA's voluntary disclosure program, taxpayers have an opportunity to correct their tax affairs prior to being audited by the CRA. It is the most efficient way for the CRA to address unreported income. Since 2006, the CRA has seen a dramatic increase in the use of this program, including those involving offshore accounts or assets, from 1,215 disclosures in 2006-2007 to close to 4,000 in 2012-2013. Total unreported income for this period was $1.77 billion and just over $470 million in federal tax owing. Whether it's a complex corporate schemes or individuals using tax savings to avoid or evade paying tax, the CRA is committed to ensuring that noncompliance is identified and addressed through education, research, international collaboration, supporting legislative change, communication, audits, and other compliance activities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And may I also just say, before I move to our first speaker, that given that this is an oversight committee, compliance with our rules and procedures is very important. And we are very quick to lower the boom on anybody who shows up here without an action plan. I just wanted to thank you and underscore the respect you showed, that you provided it not only to us, not even at the last minute, which some do, but you got it in a prompt, timely fashion that allowed us to send it out to the members so they could review it. I hope everybody takes note of the right way to provide action plans to this committee, and I specifically want to thank the CRA for adhering to the detail and the spirit of that request. Please pass that along, sir. And with that, we will now commence our rotation, beginning with Mr. Hayes. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentations. My questions will be directed to CRA officials. The report states that auditing based on such extensive informant leads for offshore accounts was a new audit area for the agency, and that the agency produced some new audit procedures, and that the work it has initiated on detecting non-compliant taxpayers is promising. Can you describe some of the new procedures to the committees that resulted from your undertaking this audit?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. There are a number of procedures and things that have happened in recent years that help us on the offshore front. First and foremost, the TIAs, the Tax Information Exchange Agreements that we have, we're now up to 18, and as I pointed out in my opening remarks, that they all come into force after 2008. So it will still take some time to get the information, but bottom line in the audit world, information is key. And the more information you have, the easier it is to do your work. And so the 18 TIAs that we have with the so-called, at the day, tax havens, we now have the ability to go to these countries to request information, banking information usually, to help us complete our audit. There's also, since 2007, the Liechtenstein list, a number of other measures, be it Budget 2013 that brought in the electronic funds transfer that will help us immensely starting next year. But there's also a number of other measures that have been brought in recent years that counter the aggressive international tax flavor of transactions. And to put it in layman's terms, there are a number of tax loopholes that have been closed in recent years. And so I would say those are three big elements. We've also created the new Offshore Tax Compliance Division that Ms. Gelmeni leads, and that area will have a strict focus on international offshore transactions. And so we've decided within the agency to create a separate group that will work specifically on those activities. So I think all those issues put together is what helps us combat offshore tax evasion.
Now, this next question, you may have answered it already, but I'm going to ask it just the same because there may be more you can add to it. The Auditor General states that one of the goals in this audit was for the Canada Revenue Agency to learn how offshore investments were structured and how taxpayers set them up. And I'm wondering if you can explain what you might have learned with that experience in terms of how these were set up, and if there's something that you've gained, again, that you can use moving forward.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So again, in 2007, this was the first time we'd ever received a list, and there was very little information other than names and perhaps the odd occasion a social insurance number. So we're basically starting from scratch. So what we learned from the first list by looking at things is how people structure their affairs to get under the radar screen, again, to put it in layman's terms. What transactions do they do? What countries do they go through to hide their assets? Whether they use intermediaries, tax professionals, how they go about conducting the business to ensure that the money is kept offshore, and we have not identified it initially. So I would say the Liechtenstein list helped us immensely by seeing the psyche of people trying to avoid paying tax.
One final question. I just want to understand this whole process of informants. If, and you know, how does the agency receive information from informants, i.e., if I were an informant and I wanted to bring information forward, what would the process be, and what would you do with that information once you received it?
We have a new offshore tax informant program, which was launched January 15th, which now pays a reward for individuals that have information that leads to the collection of federal taxes owed in excess of $100,000 that is linked to international taxes. And we have set up a 1-800 number as well as a local number that can be dialed anywhere in the world. That's the first step, is making that phone call, and we explain the parameters of the program, the requirements, the eligibility criteria, and where an individual appears to meet the program requirements, they're given a case number, they're invited to provide us with a full submission. We make an assessment of the submission, and if they appear to meet, again, the criteria for the program, we would enter into a contract with the individual, and at that point, we would do the compliance action and follow the case through the full compliance cycle.
Very good. Thank you. And time has expired, so it's perfect. Thank you so much. Moving along, Mr. Allen, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses today. I guess to Mr. Montroy, because I don't actually see it in the report, so I'm not sure whether the information is available to you or not. But in the Liechtenstein example it's used in this report, it talks about reassessing a total of $24,651,000 in taxes. Did we actually collect it? Did we actually collect the whole lot?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. We have collected roughly, I'll say, 10 million of that total. The other 14 is currently under appeal. So the way the rules work in the Income Tax Act, that if a taxpayer appeals or objects to an assessment, we are precluded from collecting. So the amounts that have not been collected so far are purely because the taxpayers have availed themselves of their rights to object and appeal.
Which leads me to the next page, and I'm sorry, I should have referenced the page. In the English edition, it was page 7, now page 8. There's a great chart that the Auditor General laid out that talked about the two streams of folks who have voluntarily decided to come into the system and say, okay, I'm not going to, I'm not going to fight here. I'm going to give the information up. It's me, yes. Okay, how do we work this through? Let's do this. So clearly we've got, 10 million, 24.6 that's assessed, 10's collected, 14's outstanding, and we decided for valid reasons, and I want to say that publicly, I think the CRA took the correct approach, for valid reasons said, I'm not going to prosecute. I want to learn how the information in the system works, so I'll not prosecute. I'll go this route instead. And folks who literally, and I got to tell you, for the good folks in Welland, they would see this as wriggling off the hook. They'd be saying to me, really? So we let them wriggle off the hook, and then they went ahead and appealed it. Now, I recognize, sir, that you don't have the choice. It wasn't your choice to appeal. It's their choice to appeal. But it seems to me that in some of the cases, should it not be, if you're letting them wriggle off the hook, away from potential criminal prosecution, that they ought not to be appealing what it basically is a reassessment done based on money that they indeed, according to what the data you've been provided, were hiding from CRA in the first place. Is there any sense of, as we go forward with, as you've laid out, you intend to do better at this because this is a learning piece and you've learned from it, and I think the report says that. Is there a piece for me to go back and tell the good folks at Welland, don't worry, they won't wriggle off that hook again, and then go ahead and appeal basically and drag it out with some high-priced lawyers? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
As the AG's report pointed out, that at the time, in 2007, when we received this list, we made agreements with a number of taxpayers not to prosecute in exchange for full payment, no objection, appeals, etc. And again, that was done at the time because this was the first time we'd ever received this list. We didn't know, as I explained earlier, we didn't know the background behind it. Since that time, I would say times have changed immensely. I referred a while ago to the TIAs. the fact that we have a number of dedicated individuals working on this, on the offshore compliance. And I would say that I've been in the compliance game for a number of years now, and certainly in the last few years, I don't recall any deals where we have said to someone that give us the information, we won't prosecute. The rules of the game have changed. If you are a tax evader and we can prove it, we will prosecute people to the full extent of the law. And we have access to information now that we did not have 6, 7 years ago that will enable us to be able to prosecute if need be.
And I appreciate the response, because clearly when folks ask me at home about these sorts of things, one of the things they want to know is when I owe my taxes, I have to pay it because I don't have the luxury of an offshore tax account. And for those who do, if it looks like they're wriggling away, clearly folks get annoyed. But my last question would be, it says in your chart on page 7, it says reassessed to $15,951,000 and resolved was 1.4. I'm not sure whether Madame McMahon, you could explain that to me exactly what those numbers mean. I think I know what it means, but it'd be helpful if I actually was told out loud. It's on page 8 of the English of the Auditor General's report.
Yes, we indicated for resolved they were either reassessed down to 0 or were paid. And it's the 14.5 is, as Mr. Montroy said, is still in appeals and not collected.
Oh, sorry, Malcolm, we're well
I
over
thought that's
time.
what it was, but thanks for telling me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Moving along, Mr. Aspen, you have the floor, sir.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome to our guests. Thanks for helping us understand the wonderful world of offshore banking. You've indicated in your submission that to oversee the implementation of these new members, the CRA has established the Offshore Compliance Division, OCD, which is a dedicated team that comprised of about 70 CRA employees. Now, my question is, have you, in the last little while, when you establish these new programs and populate them with employees, you ever do any cost-benefit analysis as to what it costs versus what they discover or bring in terms of revenue?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the question, I would say that it's pretty standard practice in the compliance world to always examine the cost-benefit ratio. We have all sorts of statistics in the agency that shows that if you invest $1 in a certain field, you would get a rate of return of, depending the area, being in the small and medium, international, large file. Certainly in the offshore area, the rate of return is fairly significant. We're usually talking of, and I'm using ballpark figures here because it depends, but usually we're talking 8 or 10 to 1 easily, the rate of return. The difficulty in these areas is that a lot of these structures that are set up are very complicated, and if we do end up reassessing and going to court, it takes a substantial amount of time to work the file, to litigate it, and so that obviously cuts into our cost benefit. But for the most part, in the offshore world, it's money well spent.
Thank you. And you concluded that CRA was diligent in its approach and benefit from the intelligence that you did gather during the Liechtenstein investigation. This government has continued to build on this success and has introduced a slew of measures to strengthen the CRA's investigative abilities, which you've outlined in your submission. Based on your review of the Liechtenstein project, do you feel the measures introduced in the last budget, Economic Action Plan 2013, the one before the one we just released, will improve this likelihood?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Budget 2013 included a number of measures that will help us in the fight in offshore tax evasion. I referred to a few of them in the opening statement: the offshore informant tax program, the electronic funds transfers that we are currently working on now to set up a system to be able to receive the information starting January 1st of 2015. There were a number of other measures, such as streamlining the process to get unnamed person requirements to go to court once as opposed to twice before, and the T1135, which is a form for offshore holdings, and attached to that was the fact that anybody who doesn't do what they're supposed to, fills the form incorrectly, or does certain things, the legislation extended the period of time for us to uncover and audit these measures. So Budget 2013 had a number of very important, significant measures for us on the offshore front. As I also alluded to a while ago, there was also a number of tax loopholes that were closed that are very important. But again, I also have to mention that the negotiation of TIAs that started in 2000, and actually it started as far back as mid-2000s, the TIAs are a very, very important factor in the fight against tax evasion and offshore aggressive tax planning, because the more tools we have, the more it gets out there. The taxpayers have less and less ways to hide the information, and that is why the voluntary disclosures continue to go up, because there's more and more measures that assist us to uncover offshore holdings.
Seconds.
Thank you.
Good, great, perfect. Thank you so much. Mr. Giguère, you have the floor, sir.
Je remercie beaucoup les témoins de cette présentée.
Thank you for the witnesses. Thank you to the witnesses for coming. My first question for the agency or for the auditor, you have the choice. On page 12, there is a summary. In page 10 in the English document, I do not see the obligation to participate in the arrest of the professional who planned the tax evasion. Am I wrong? In the Liechtenstein list, there was very little indication that anyone was promoting tax evasion. We see it relatively often now. We have measures and penalties that are relatively severe for third parties who help and plan this kind of activity. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but the penalties for third parties are something that we impose fairly often, and the penalties are rather severe. I'm surprised because in May 2013, Mr. James Rajat, member for Edmonton, in his report on tax fraud, indicated that there were no penalties against professionals who participated in this kind of tax evasion. Would it be possible that something has happened since then? The government used this document to establish the last budget and to establish your 5-point answer. But in your 5 points, it's not specifically indicated whether there are penalties for professionals or institutions, financial institutions, who participate actively in planning tax fraud. I would like to know who's telling the truth. The officials who testified before the Finance Committee, presided by Mr. James Rajat, or the information that you are giving to us now? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have the report from Mr. Rajat in front of me, but according to tax law, there are penalties for third parties. They've existed for many, many years. It is possible that Mr. Rajat was talking about how it's relatively difficult, let's admit it, to prove that a financial institution was directly involved in terms of attempting to commit fraud or help taxpayers commit fraud. But I can assure you, Mr. Chair, that we are applying penalties to third parties regularly against those who help others and who benefit from a strategy to avoid income tax. Third-party penalties are often imposed when it comes to tax havens, or tax shelters, rather. I think you're referring to using a different name. A lawyer is bound by client confidentiality in Canada. In Canada, as a tax lawyer, and I can tell you about this, client solicitor privilege holds. The only way to break that privilege is to force the taxpayer who participates in an agreement to indicate that their own lawyer or accountant was involved. That's the only way to break solicitor-client privilege. I didn't see that in your documents. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am also a lawyer, and I understand solicitor-client privilege very well. But if we have an indication that something has happened and it's not 100% clean, there are many ways for us to obtain information. I talked about exchanging information with other countries. As of next year, we'll have access to financial data. We're no longer limited by the information that is covered by solicitor-client privilege. There are other ways to obtain that information. On that level, are you able to evaluate overall a range of the level of how much your agency has to recover in tax avoidance? Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a very good question. We often see it in the media. The attempt to evaluate tax avoidance or evasion and how much money the government is not receiving because of it. It is relatively difficult to say with absolute certainty what we don't know. Many countries, I would say, the great majority of OECD countries, do not calculate the tax cap. There are very few countries who analyze the tax cap. It is difficult to evaluate or calculate what essentially is unknown. Our agency and many other countries, OECD countries, took the approach of, instead of studying something that could be entirely theoretical, we would use our resources in order, on a practical level, to invest in tools to attempt to recover those funds. Thank you very much.
Both, and over to Mr. Woodworth. You have the floor, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony and the time that you have given us today.
On paragraphs 9.24 to 9.29 of the audit, and I will address most of my questions to Ms. McMahon, if that's all right. And I'd like to begin by requesting a bit of clarification with respect to paragraph 9.27, where there is reference to two matters being referred to the Criminal Investigations Division. And I have the idea that the Criminal Investigations Division is not part of CRA but is part of the Justice Department. I'm not sure about that and wondered, Ms. McMahon, if you can tell me where the Criminal Investigations Division is situated.
It is situated in CRA. It is a division
right.
within the agency.
And so did you conduct an audit of the Criminal Investigations Division?
No, we stayed in our chapter that we only looked at the division under Mr. Montroy's responsibility. We did note that two were forwarded to this division, but we did not look at the decision made by that division on those two cases.
What I was interested in. Thank you. So your audit was limited to the division that Mr. Montroy heads, and what is the name of that division? Mr. Montroy can tell us if you can.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I think I need to clarify that the Criminal Investigations Director, it does report to me as well. It's one of 6 directorates that reports to me, and but the branch is the Compliance Programs branch.
So the audit, that's what I'm trying to get at, is the scope of the audit. It was not, it did not include the Criminal Investigations Division, but it did include the Compliance Reporting Directorate. Is that the term?
The audit area.
Audit area? Okay. So, and I'm asking about that because I think that there may be different purposes involved in each division. Would that be your understanding, Ms. McMahon?
Yes, and we do mention that in, as we described in paragraphs 24 and 25,
Yes.
That there's different objectives. So we did look at the audit division, and for those files that they did make referrals, and then we looked at the other 6 where they did not make referrals to see if they were consistent in applying their decisions to forward it or not.
Did your audit lead you to conclude would be the purpose of the objective of the division that you did audit? The audit division, if I can put it that way.
For the 8 cases.
Pardon me, I'm not referring to specific cases, but I want to clarify the distinction between these 2 directorates. My question to you is, am I right that they would each have different objectives? And then I'm asking, and I think you said yes, and then I'm asking you, what would you have considered to be the objective of the unit that you did audit? What objective were you measuring against in your audit?
So what we looked at was, as mentioned, if the file had an agreement in place, then it wasn't to be referred to that division at all. So for those, that was the first.
I'm sure I'm not asking my question correctly because I don't seem to be getting it across. What do you consider to be the objective of the division that you were auditing?
To assess taxes where warranted.
Okay. And therefore, everything that it does is to be directed to that objective, obviously, right? I just want to know I'm on the right track in understanding your report. So, for example, when you said in paragraph 9.28, the agreement served a purpose for the Liechtenstein list audits. Mm-hmm. Can you articulate for me what purpose it was that the agreements were serving?
As mentioned in the previous paragraph, because this was the first time that the agency had received this type of information, there was a choice being made on whether to acquire information through this agreement to learn about how some of these structures were set up and to acquire their information to continue with assessing further files.
Okay. Sorry, time has expired.
Already out of time.
Sorry, sir.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Now over to Mr. Sims, and if I may, I want to bring to the attention of members that although Mr. Sims has been with us for a short time and a powerful time, he is actually, however, moving on to another committee. Ms. Jones will be our new permanent member, but as a result of those scheduling, Mr. Sims is actually here as a substitution today. But I want to take this opportunity just to, on behalf of all members of the committee, thank you for your time here, positive contribution, and much appreciated. So thank you, sir, for your time here.
Thank
you
you
now
very
have the floor.
much. Thank you very much, Chair. You're very kind, and my time was short, but it certainly was a good time. Thank you. Good time had. And I still hope, by the way, that you carry on to Newfoundland on the island this summer to do that. He's expecting, right. Well, you've got another Newfoundlander, sorry, Labradorian, so there you go. I want to go back to this for a moment, this exchange that took place here, because I'm not quite clear about the criminal investigation part of it whatsoever. Not so much the division and how this works, but it seems to me that, if I can quote here, there were valid reasons for 6 of the cases. There were valid reasons that led to the conclusion that no referral would be made in accordance with agency procedures. And of the 8 files, considering prosecution, the division did not accept either for further investigation. Why wasn't this the case? Is it because of the system that we have we couldn't do that, or did you feel that in these particular cases it just wasn't necessary? I guess I'm asking, sorry, I'm asking Mr. Richmond. Sorry.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. In the criminal investigation front, like in the courts, you have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, as opposed to the work that we do in the audit world, which is civil assessment. So you raise an assessment based on the preponderance of evidence. So the people in the criminal investigation front have to look at whether there's enough evidence to support a prosecution. And if that's the case, then it goes to public prosecutions, PPSC, to carry the ball from that point. The cases that the few cases we saw here in Liechtenstein, there was not enough evidence to support the laying of charges. And that is because there was so little information on file, we were not able to pursue.
This was the fault because of the particular cases,
Yes.
not the tools in the toolbox that we had that prevented us from doing such. Okay. That being said, though, with these new agreements, these new tax agreements, I want to ask about jurisdiction. Because in foreign jurisdictions, now I should point this out tonight, 35 and 40. Information requires that unnamed persons, it says the agency has begun issuing these notices to foreign banks operating in Canada, but there are challenges to getting information about offshore investment. Foreign jurisdictions do not have to respond to these types of requests, even though they have an entity within this country?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The whole information holding is a very complicated area, but it's an excellent question. It's something we're faced with often, that if the information is held in a bank in another country, we cannot use the Income Tax Act, an unnamed person requirement, to force them to give us information. Clearly, they're not residents of Canada, which is why the TIAs are important, because we can use the TIAs to go to the Cayman Islands of the world, the Bermudas, Bahamas, and get their tax administrations to get the information from the local financial institution.
So you're saying that for those countries that we do not have TIAs associated, we could be in a situation where our investigators are absolutely frozen if they're holding an account, despite the financial institution's presence here. If they're headquartered somewhere else in the world, then obviously we can't do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, because I was one of the people who negotiated the first 5 TIAs. The Canadian government took a step back and looked at what are the countries that are most of interest to Canada. And so since that time, we've prioritized the various countries, which is why you see TIAs with Bahamas, Bermuda, Jersey, Guernsey, etc. British Virgin Islands, BVI has not come into force yet, but the agreement has come. We've come to an agreement with them. Those are the countries that we typically see Canadians investing in other countries.
Okay, very quick. I'm going to switch gears again. I only have like a few seconds left. I just want to talk about the up-to-date, go to 9.4, sorry, chapter 40. Up-to-date guides would be useful for auditors as of the end of our audit. The wiki page, as is called, for information that was gathered during the process with Liechtenstein, has not developed enough to be helpful even today. Is that correct?
We're in the process of developing the wiki page, and it will be used by the offshore compliance specialized teams when they're implemented fully in April. So we are developing it now, and we're progressing well on it.
That's it. Very good. Perfect timing. Doing well, colleagues. Moving along, Mr. Falk, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, for years I've tried to figure out how CRA thinks. And I'm not sure if I'm more confused today or clarified, but I see your speaking notes. I have to start at the back and go forward. So I'm a little bit confused still. My question is around the 2013 Economic Action Plan contained measures in there for financial institutions to provide you information on wire transfers, international wire transfers of $10,000 or more. If I heard correctly, you're not analyzing that data yet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The legislation only comes into effect January 1st, 2015. So as a result, right now, we're in the process of building the system that will, so that when January 1st, 2015 comes along, when financial institutions start sending us the information, we will have the systems in place to be able to analyze the information and act on it. But as it stands now, the legislation doesn't come into effect until 2015.
Okay, I think financial institutions have been complying with FinTrack.
Yes.
For probably 2 or 3 years already in that regard. Do you plan to retroactively analyze that data?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say that at this point, we already receive some information from FinTrack. There's a whole bunch of rules that are in place to analyze certain transactions. So when FinTrack suspects that there's money laundering and also tax evasion, they have the capacity now to provide us information. And I would say for the most part, the most egregious cases, we already get through referrals from FinTrack. What this new legislation will allow us, we'll be able to cast the net wider to look at all transactions and not just the most egregious cases.
Okay, thank you for that. Your informant program, is that legislation only being also enacted in 2015?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The informant legislation is not legislation, it's a program.
Okay.
And so we launched that. The Minister of National Revenue launched the program in January of this year, and we have, since that time, as Ms. Gelmeni mentioned a few minutes earlier, already started receiving phone calls from various informants.
Okay. And the fees that people can expect from being an informant, I see from your report, range between 5 and 15%. That would be based on how well they negotiate, or is there a schedule?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The 5 to 15% is based on the quality of the information they receive and a number of other factors. It's also, we're relying on best practices at other countries, because there are a few other countries out there that also have paid informants programs. So we based our program on the best practices of the other countries.
Okay. And in the Liechtenstein cases, were the taxpayers primarily individuals or corporations?
I would say there was a mixture of both. There were individuals, there were trusts, there was a mixture of entities.
Okay. And if I have, do I still have some time?
Yeah.
Oh, good. The report also states that the current audit guide for offshore banking is from 2001, is what the auditor's report states. Are the audit guidelines being updated with today's, and maybe they have been already, with today's situation, banking situation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. We have we've done a number of things. Ms. Gelmeni talked about the wiki page, but we also sent instructions in January of this year to the people who are going to be working on the offshore front, talking about a number of measures, the time it takes to do an audit, the information you're supposed to look at, and basically a roadmap of what they should do. So that went out in January of this year.
They're constantly being updated?
Yes.
Great. The audit also notes that you assess penalties on a case-by-case basis. Is that being effective?
Penalties are always a very good deterrent, and the reason why we say it's always on a case-by-case basis, because no two situations are identical, and so we've always had a practice at the agency that we do not levy penalties unless we look at the facts of the situation.
And if I have time for one quick question, that 5 to 15% for informants, it says on taxes. Is that on taxes, interest, and penalties, or just taxes?
It's on taxes assessed and collected.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That you're much better. I used to do that all the time. Just a little question, and I'd be going on and on. I really appreciate you respecting that. Thank you. Moving along, back over to Monsieur Giguère. You have the floor, sir. Merci.
Thank you. Now that the government has decided to deal with the Liechtenstein case, it seems to me that this is a case that's been offered on a silver platter. There are informants who have privileged information, and you pay them. Are you proactive? Do you look for representatives of international financial institutions by saying, you know, people who deal with you, the millions of dollars that they invest in your financial institution, you're an accountant, you're in IT, you could end up with a few $1 million yourself. Are you proactive? Do you try to discuss with people who have this information to encourage them to become informants? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I would say that now we are proactive in that sense because the program just started and many people have already called and given information. It's relatively difficult for the agency to do any marketing in financial institutions because it could be seen as crossing the line to encourage people to commit a criminal offense. For the moment, we are not proactive in that sense. I appreciate the answer, but now I have a question when it comes to established procedure. This established procedure, the Auditor General did a draft. Does it seem to be relatively fast, and does it lead to a good result given the importance of the information that had been communicated? Does the result seem acceptable to you? There was a series, a whole group of people committing fraud. We identified an amount linked to that, and we obtained a certain amount. Does that seem acceptable to you, or should there be improvements? Thank you. I'm not sure I fully understand the question about our chapter. Our audit audited the Liechtenstein list only, and the laws that were in effect at the time.
Oui. Oui, les activités qui commençaient avec la liste.
Activities started with the list, yes. And was it an improvement? Yes. Since 2007, yes. I mentioned that it was a real improvement. The efforts made? Yes. They seem to be positive. But when it comes to an evaluation, no. The CRA told the Standing Committee on Finance when it was holding hearings.
I'm confused because this committee has nothing to do with the Finance Committee. We don't know what happened at the Finance Committee and what didn't. This seems to be straying outside of the purview of this particular audit.
No, I hear your point, and I share your thought that I'm not convinced that Mr. Giguère is making the points that he's trying to make, but at this point, unless, because I've noted the issue, and unless and until Mr. Giguère is asking an unfair question of someone who doesn't have that report in front of them, I'm allowing Mr. Giguère some latitude to make his comments, as I do with all members. But the point at which it starts to be unfair, because he's making a reference, if he did make a reference in a question to a document that the witnesses don't have, then I would have to pull that back. But for now, I don't think he's gone beyond the latitude that is given a member to make his statements. When it comes to the questions, though, they need to be fair. And not having the information in front of you is not fair, and so I would deal with that accordingly. Mr. Albus.
Just a question on that, Mr. I won't belabor the point, though, is that the transcripts of this committee do go in towards our process of drafting a report to report back to the House. So, you know, if a member does seem to stray off the subject matter considerably, I would hope that, that the analysts would be looking at that and saying what's pertinent to the actual reporting process. So I'm just hopeful that that is the standard case.
I would expect that the analysts will continue to use the excellent discretion they've been using, and I think that your time on this committee has shown that statement is not an over-the-top statement. But I would also point out that, of course, it takes a majority of the committee to approve something in the final report as the committee report. So there's a double safeguard, if you will, from concerns. And I think your concern is somebody having the ability, and we'll stop the clock here for a moment, having the ability to say something and skew the report, although that statement didn't really have any factual basis, in your opinion, in where we are or relevancy. And so your point is well taken, but we do need to buttress that against the right of members, particularly at committee, to have wide latitude, and I know you support that because I've given you that latitude. But I do think we have the checks and balances, but it's always worth underscoring these things. Thank you for your point. Any other further interventions? Hearing none, start the clock. Monsieur Giguère, you have the floor again.
Alors, je vais donner une information qui est...
I will give you information that is public. Since 2006, the Canada Revenue Agency says that it has collected $4.6 million from tax evasion by reviewing 8,000 cases. Is that going to increase? Or is this essentially a cruising altitude and you think there's a lot of work to be done? And in the last governmental budget, you received a 5-point plan to improve your performance. Are these 5 points going to be sufficient to improve your performance? Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is an excellent question. I often talk to my boss about results. Results are from year to year based on the situation, the economic situation, and current economic parameters. The 2013 budget, I referred to it earlier, and I indicated that many tax loopholes were closed by that budget. It goes without saying that as a person responsible for audits, I'm very pleased that the government has passed measures that close those kinds of loopholes. However, there are consequences on our results because there are some things that we would check for in the past, and we obtained results because of those previous audits, and those no longer exist because the loopholes have been closed. But as the good optimist that I am, I know that people are proactive and they will find other ways to commit tax evasion. It's a game, but it's a game that exists in every country. From the second that a government does anything, professionals in the field will find another way to open another door.
Moving along, Mr. Chisu, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to the witnesses to appear in the front of this committee. And I am humbled and I am just enjoying this wonderful experience to be between lawyers and accountants playing an engineer. So I have a question to Ms. McMahon from the Auditor General's office. The international tax evasion is a very serious issue, and that was largely ignored in the past by the successive Liberal governments. As a result, the Liechtenstein case was one of the first major compliance projects of its kind. Despite this, generally the opposition has been highly critical of the results of this investigation. In your report, you recognize that due diligence was done when deciding which files to pursue. Can you elaborate on this, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we, in our chapter, we start out in paragraphs 8 through 11 to identify that we reviewed CRA's actions in taking the names on the list and determining which ones to audit and which taxpayers not to audit. And they do have procedures to follow to ascertain which ones to follow through. And we did, we had no concerns. As we state, sufficient work was done to justify the decision on which taxpayers to continue auditing and which ones that the agency decided not to audit.
Okay, thank you very much. I am follow up with the following question. Based on your report, I think it's fair to say that the CRA handled the Liechtenstein project quite well. You mentioned in your report that this project was relatively uncharted territory for the CRA when it began. Yet it's no secret that offshore tax evasion has been around for a very, very long time. Can you comment on what the CRA's approach to the offshore tax evasion was prior to 2006 and why something like this was never done prior to that time?
I will start answering and probably recommend that the agency continue with the answer. This audit, we looked at how the agency managed the Liechtenstein list only. We did note that it was the first time that they had received such extensive information in this manner. But we only, we concentrated our efforts on only what they did with this list starting in 2007. Anything done prior, I would defer to the agency.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Actually, it's a very good point about what happened in the past, and I would have to say it's easy today in 2014 to say that this happened and that happened, but if you take a step back, I was lucky enough to be one of Canada's reps on the former harmful tax practice where we looked at what the so-called tax havens did and countries involved in bank secrecy. And it's no secret that Switzerland was one of those countries. And I would say in the mid-2000s, when I was a member of the former harmful tax practice, I never thought for a million years that I would see Switzerland signing an amended treaty with Canada for Article 26, which is the exchange of information. And a year or so ago, 2 years, whatever the case may be, Canada signed a new treaty with Switzerland that includes the OECD standard for Article 26. And we now exchange banking information with Switzerland. So things have changed dramatically in the last few years, and I think they will continue to change dramatically. The head of the OECD, Mr. Owens, the ex-head, had said that a lot of the stuff that the OECD and their treaty partners were doing is their ultimate goal is to ensure that nobody has room to hide money anywhere in the world. And I think the OECD and its member countries have done a very good job in a relatively short period of time.
Just a couple of seconds, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any lessons learned from this Liechtenstein file? So, if you can tell us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The lessons learned, basically, I talked a bit about it earlier. We now know how certain structures are set up, and so to put it in layman's terms, we know now where to look. It's as simple as that, and that helped us a lot in 2007 to get access to that information, and we use it every day on other things.
Very good. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chisu. Moving on, Mr. Sims, you have the floor again, sir.
Great. Way to go, Mr. Chizu. Patting yourself on the back for the developments of other countries such as Switzerland. Well, there you go. We've continued in that mode. I would say, I want to go, you said you worked 5 agreements? 5 agreements you said you worked on? The original 5 or T agreements,
yes,
sorry?
Yes, sir, the original 5, yes.
Oh, interesting. So you have quite a bit of experience in this, and dealing with other countries, such as Switzerland, what do you find is the biggest change in dealing with this? And first of all, what have been the biggest advances? And second of all, what continues to be the biggest frustration?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say the biggest change is there are a number of countries, and I'll use one as an example, the Isle of Man, which was one of the first of the 5 countries that Canada negotiated with. The Isle of Man was considered a tax haven, and they truly wanted to change the way they were seen in the international community. And there are a number of countries, Isle of Man is one of many, have wanted to legitimize their economies and wanted to be seen well in the international community. So I would say over the last 5 years or so, that is probably the biggest thing, that a number of countries have stepped to the front and genuinely want to change the way things work. The biggest challenge, I would say, Mr. Chair, is that taxpayers and their advisors continue to use every way to impede giving the CRA access to information. So we do spend a lot of time and resources going to court, trying to force institutions and entities to give us the information. It's a very slow process. So I've learned in my job to be very, very patient. It's a long game. But we now have the tools in place to deal with those issues.
Yeah, I noticed the proliferation of larger banks around the world, certainly in the past 10 years. Is that an impediment as well for people to hide assets around some of the bigger institutions, or does that help?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think the proliferation of banks really has that big an impact on this issue. It's more the tax intermediaries or the advisors who try to find ways to hide money in various places.
In doing the exercise you went through with the Liechtenstein, one of the things was timelines. It seems to me that one of the situations, I asked Ms. McMahon, you talk about timelines and talk about how it has to be delivered in a timely manner, but it seemed during the Liechtenstein experience the timelines were not as defined, per se, for the particular auditors. Do you feel that's, in doing that, was that an open-ended thing? Were there some areas where timelines were good, but this, in general, it was too open-ended?
As we state, there was no definition for the timelines. There were no standards established for this project. So that's where we had indicated in paragraph 15. And then we indicated in paragraph 16 that yes, having the standards would be important. So we encourage the agency to set.
Assuming this can be responded to by Ms. Gelmini?
Yes, we've established timelines, and they've been communicated to the offshore compliance specialized teams.
And this is for all new areas at your TIA agreements and so on and so forth, and you have a pretty standardized practice?
That's correct.
Right. And how does that go? Does the guidelines, like the wiki?
There's a number of them. The wiki is part of the guidelines, but we've sent a package including a number of information areas, one of which is the wiki, and the timelines as well have been.
Yeah, because it seems to be quite key here to helping out future auditors as they go through this. Is that correct? For CRA?
Yes, we're providing as many tools as we can to help them.
Final quick question. The commission that's offered to people who are informants, that's 5 to 15%, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is that taxable?
Yes,
I'm kidding.
it is.
It is.
I have to go out on a high note, sir.
No, you can't pick a better note to take your bow out from this committee. Thank you so much, Mr. Sims. Now, back to Mr. Albus. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank all of our witnesses here today. Specifically, I'm going to direct my first question to Assistant Auditor General McMahon and perhaps Director Miller, whoever can best answer. First of all, while I understand through the report that there were some legitimate concerns raised about priority setting at the onset of the list becoming known, and also some aspects of it. You know, some of the criticism I have heard from the opposition is that the CRA didn't treat this kind of behavior with the seriousness or had properly committed to resourcing. You know, when I read through this, I think that particularly since a development of such a substantive list had never been seen before, I don't think it actually had been undertaken by a previous government, this kind of audit. You know, would you agree that that CRA did take this most seriously and diligently set out to see this through?
As we concluded, we did conclude that the agency conducted their compliance actions adequately. However, and they followed their own procedures. In our recommendations, however, we do identify some areas for improvement, such as setting timelines and updating their procedures and training their staff. I don't know if Heather wants to add anything more on our conclusion, but that's what we looked at. It was to see if they were following their own procedures and taking those lessons learned and updating their procedures for future lists.
And Director Gelmini, you mentioned to Mr. Sims that those timelines are now being done if a similar occasion or a similar occurrence was to happen. Is that correct?
That's correct. Timelines have been communicated.
Now, I'm very interested, your correct title is Assistant Commissioner, correct? Okay, well, it's nice to have you today, sir. You know, it's my understanding since you were involved in some of these TIA's tax information exchange agreements. Now, when this list first materialized, did we have a TIA with Liechtenstein?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the TIA with Liechtenstein was just recently signed. In fact, in 2007, when we received the Liechtenstein list, there were no TIAs signed at that point.
So the environment has changed radically because and I guess, Mr. Chair, what I'm saying is that by going through this process, particularly, you know, when you're dealing with international operations, it can be very difficult if you only can see one side of the equation. So having these TIAs, I imagine, Mr. Montroy, will make you know, the work of CRA more efficient and more focused, I'm sure. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Now, the one thing I wanted to raise, Mr. Chair, is that from reading the report, and I give all credit to the Auditor General, is that it really reaffirms the fact in my mind, the old sentiment, there's only, you know, two things you can count on in life, death and taxes, obviously focusing more on the tax side. So yeah, this seemed to me that the particular lead that you received, I'm going to call it a lead, from this informant was absolutely critical to this whole process being opened up. Is that correct?
At that time, yes, that is correct.
Okay, and when Assistant Auditor General McMahon opened up her statement, she said other lists have been received. Is that correct since then? I'm not sure if it's the same quality or scope, but other lists similar to this may have come forward. Is that correct?
That is correct. We work with our treaty partners. We have actually quite an extensive network of countries that we work with, and so yes, we occasionally get lists from our treaty partners.
And I think it's particularly important because I think most people that are sitting at home, or most people, are familiar with the idea of an informant and how important that is to a case, cases like these. And I think it's important for us to encourage people that may have similar information to come forward. So, Director Gelmini, your suggestion that there are ways for people to get in touch, I think, is important. But in the Auditor General's report, it talks about something called informer privilege. Can you just, either one of you, just comment what that is? I think it's important, Mr. Chair, that people at home who may be engaging in this kind of evasion or aggressive avoidance know that there are protections, and not just incentives that Mr. Sims had mentioned earlier, that there are protections that can be offered for people when they bring forward information that's important to CRA's functioning.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So real briefly, in our tax informant program, we have a number of measures in place to protect the confidentiality. It's pretty a well-established principle in international law that you try to protect the identity of the informant for security reasons. And so we have measures in place to protect the identity of the informant. Yes, thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And moving right along, Mr. Giguère, you have the floor once again, sir.
Pour les fins du public, j'aimerais...
For the public, I'd like to come back to the most recent information given by Mr. Albas. When it, planning to evade taxes is illegal, not planning to do it. Even if tax evasion planning, one cannot be brought before the court for planning to evade taxes. What the law does not forbid is allowed. Mr. Albas's information was therefore inappropriate, and it could be confirmed by the representatives from the department and the Auditor General. When it comes to the lists, when you have an informant, what is the relevance or the cogency of this information? If this list contains encrypted data, how does the agency by itself manage to establish enough convincing data for that list to lead to a reassessment and penalties with interest, if as the case may be? Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we're talking simply about civilian reassessment, it would depend on the weight of the proof. There's many things that we can do to check on the information. There's national information. There's banking information that we can obtain within Canada. And, if necessary, we use tax agreements or tax conventions with other countries to obtain information. When we talk about tax evasion, or tax avoidance, it's harder to prove it beyond any shadow of a doubt, because it's much harder to obtain that proof. The individuals involved have the right, under Canadian law, to a certain amount of protection. The way we obtain information is different when we talk about tax evasion and criminal consequences. There's no criminal charges for tax avoidance. The Supreme Court made a decision. It is not a crime to take legal measures to pay less tax. If you will allow, I will answer to that in English, because I'm sorry, I often work in English.
And tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is perfectly legal, and as the honourable member mentioned a few minutes ago, what is not prohibited is permitted. So tax avoidance is something that we see often, playing in the margins of the law, but it's permitted. Tax evasion is a very different story, and that is criminal in nature.
C'est bien ce que j'avais dit. Et à ce niveau-là, comment peut...
Yes, that's what I said. If the proof obtained, the list, for example, the list of people you obtain, if the list is stolen from a financial institution that is offshore, do you have the right to use it? Because in the case of the Liechtenstein list, staff members of the bank have been brought before the courts in Europe. Interpol is looking into it. Is there a structure for protecting your witnesses that could go as far as considering them political refugees? Thank you. The question of whether or not we can use stolen information is a very good one. What I call fruit of the poison tree. I cannot answer for Canada today because we have not faced that kind of situation yet. However, our legal advisors assure us that we can use the information. I would add that in France, as you mentioned, at a first-level court, it was judged that the government did not have the right to use that information. However, that decision was reversed after an appeal. Currently, in France, the government is allowed to use stolen information.
I'm okay. And for our last question, over to Mr. Hayes.
I don't think so.
Well, I'm only going by what I've been told here. So
I
if
can
there's
wing
a,
one.
Mr. Albus?
And thank you. If we could pass it to Mr. Woodworth.
Sure, no problem. Mr. Woodworth, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just continue along the conversation we had a little earlier, Ms. McMahon, because what we've heard today is that there has been some significant demonstrable success to this Liechtenstein project. And what we've heard today is that there has been significant financial recovery and benefit from the audits. But we also hear continual questioning from the opposition about why taxpayers weren't prosecuted. So I know that in your report you shed light on the use of these non-prosecution agreements by the CRA as a means of gathering information and intelligence. And I know that in paragraph 9.28 you've indicated that these agreements did serve a purpose, and so I assume that it was the proper approach for CRA. And I would like you to comment a little bit on why that approach was necessary and why we were better served because of the intelligence gathered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. We didn't evaluate whether it was the appropriate action. We audited the actions undertaken by the agency. The agency, by the time our audit had started, had already entered into these agreements. So what we reviewed was the purpose and the reason behind entering in those agreements and finding out the reasons why. And we stated we didn't evaluate whether any post-mortem on that. And we do mention that they should analyze their own success or lessons learned from the use of those agreements on a go-forward basis.
Just elaborate a little bit then about what you discovered concerning the purpose of those agreements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where we say specifically that the agency had informed us that the purpose of the agreements, they had made a trade-off between either obtaining information by entering into the agreement or considering prosecuting taxpayers. And we just state what management had told us.
For example, when you state in a positive sense in paragraph 9.24 as follows, and I'm going to quote, "In a criminal prosecution, the agency must ensure that the information will hold up in court. Once a taxpayer learns that he or she is being investigated with prosecution as a policy, he or she is no longer obliged to provide information to the auditor." Are you saying that you didn't verify those statements? I took them to be accurate statements, and I'm not sure now from your answer if you're telling me that you didn't mean them to be accurate statements or verifiable statements.
Yes, they are verifiable statements. The auditors we are referring to are the Canada Revenue Agency staff.
So the fact is, I can take it to the bank that once a taxpayer learns that he or she is being investigated with prosecution as a possibility, he or she is no longer obliged to provide information to the auditor, correct?
Yes.
All right, so that would be, in fact, one purpose for a non-prosecution agreement is to induce the individual to provide information, right? Am I on the right track there? I'm just trying to read what you wrote and understand it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, if I could answer. The agency was dealing with a situation where taxpayer information was provided to them at a fairly low level. They didn't have a great deal of detail. I think early on in the chapter we explain in paragraph 7 that some of these people, all they had was a name or a date of birth and a dollar amount. So with some of these cases, when they entered into the agreement, it wasn't so much if we go into the agreement, we waive prosecution, although that was the result. When they were going into the agreement with these taxpayers, they couldn't possibly have been in a position to prosecute because they didn't have any information. So obtaining the information from the taxpayers, had they not signed the agreement, they wouldn't have received the information. It's sort of a chicken and egg situation.
This division is to obtain sufficient information to assess the taxes owing.
And to learn about how these structures are set up and how to go forward from these. That was part of the mandate of this project.
Very good. Sorry, Mr. Woodworth.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may, then, we have concluded a full rotation of our questions. And by previous agreement, we will move forward. But beforehand, first of all, on behalf of the committee, let me thank our guests today. And let me also emphasize the appreciation we have for both the fulsomeness but also the tightness of the responses, which is not easy to do. So very well done. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. You may now leave and head home to your families. Colleagues, you're not quite so fortunate. I will suspend this meeting for a few moments to allow people who are not included in the business section of our meeting, and also to allow the technicians to reset. We will reconvene in a couple moments in camera to do committee business. This portion of the meeting now stands suspended.